it's not just open your mouth willy-nilly. We've systematized this into what we call a gear system. And that's an easy way to think about it, is like their gears. So it's not like when you're driving a car, you go, oh, fourth gear is bad. You just want fourth gear to be used appropriately in order to maintain RPMs. A Ferrari F50 and a Volkswagen Bug both have first gear, but a Volkswagen Bug goes 16 miles an hour in first gear, and a Ferrari F50 goes 60 miles an hour in first gear. But they both have a first gear. A Volkswagen Bug shouldn't compare itself to a Ferrari. It should just know, like, what's the capacity of my own engine?
The Fitness Movement is brought to you by Zor Fitness. We offer coaching and individualized program design, as well as educational content for coaches and athletes. It's all one place, zorfitness.com. Today's episode is being pulled from the archives. I wanted to revisit a conversation I had with Rob Wilson. Rob is someone who had his hands deeply in the CrossFit community, as well as someone who's really experimented heavily with and become an expert in breath work and all things related to that. So in this conversation, obviously, we get into those topics and how breathing, how you can center yourself, your mindset, physiology, all of how that connects to breathing and movement as a whole. So again, this is a really insightful conversation that one of the ones that has stuck out to me over the years that I look back on and can think about. And I hope you can learn a lot from it. So please enjoy this conversation with Rob Wilson. Rob, welcome to the show.
Ben, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. You're someone that I definitely respect from a functional fitness standpoint, as well as actually in the breath practice and an educator as well. So I, really appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. Functional fitness.
Yeah, that's like the, neutral term.
You don't have to get into anybody's specific ideology.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So we're going to start off. I want to hear about what your breath practice currently looks like.
Oh, my personal one?
Yeah, your personal one.
Sure. Very little seated breath practice right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly movement, integrated with movement, whether it's yoga or some kind of whatever experimentation I'm doing, or it's all, I would say 90% of it is integrated with movement, whether that's my daily movement practice or strength and conditioning or jiu-jitsu. And the reason for that is environment dictates behavior a lot of times. And I haven't had functioning heat in my house. So it's been like in the 40s in my house in the morning. So all of February I'd wake up and it'd be like 42. I'm like,
oh, man,
I'm not sitting on the hardwood floor to do breath work when it's 42. It's just like, I do enough things for resilience. I really don't want to make this miserable too. So now that the weather's starting to turn, I'll go back to doing, it'll be more like 50-50 or 70-30. And sometimes I go through phases where it'll be all seated for like a month. But right now it's all movement based, or like 90%. Just because that's what suits me personally and the environment I'm finding myself in. I really like seated breath work, but it hasn't made sense for me for the last month.
Totally. How much of that is like more of a relaxed cadence, more of what you might call like parasympathetic breath work protocols, like slower breathing type stuff? When you're doing the seated breath work.
I mean, for me, I'm pretty mellow dude, so I tend to lean to the parasympathetic. So I actually quite enjoy some superventilation practices or moderated, like fast breathing. Some people might think of like Wim Hof or like a breath of fire or something like that. It's really, one thing that's happened over the years is I've become more sensitive to what my needs are and adjusting sometimes day by day based on my needs, unless I'm exploring a specific outcome. Like I'm trying to understand a component differently, then I'll really key in on something like, hey, I'm going to do this every day, no matter what. Like,
right.
I'm doing these kind of breaths and I'm going to do it for this long, no matter what. But for me, it tends to be pretty responsive to what I need. But a lot of times it's, I like, we have a protocol we use called the step up, which has a nice balance actually between fast breathing and slow breathing. And what I find that it does, rather than make me more parasympathetic or more sympathetic, it puts me in the middle, makes me really calm and alert and focused, which is the outcome that I really want. Like my breath practice primarily is in the morning, not long after I wake up. And I'm just waking up from being at the sort of peak of parasympathetic activity, which is sleep. For me, I really don't want more parasympathetic if I've had a good night's sleep, right? So
Right.
I want to be alert and calm and focused and have my mind on track. And so that's the outcome I tend to want is the middle. I want the pendulum to start in relatively in the middle of the full swing, and then my other general goal is to be able to transition between high and low when I want to, how I want to, if I want to. So for example, if I'm doing a really hard training session and I'm getting after it, I want to be able to come back down from that quickly. Or if I'm kind of in a rested state and I need to like get focused and kind of get my stuff together and get on the move, I want to be able to transition to that kind of state quickly. Like the other day I was just post movement practice and I was drinking coffee and my wife came down and she was like, one of the horses got out. I gotta go catch him. And I was like, oh, do you need help? And she was like, I really do, but I have to go now. So I was like, snap out of it. Coffee time's over. Get focused, get your jacket, shoes, whatever. I knew I was going to need to fix the fence. So I had to grab some tools and out in the door. And it was, early in the day. So it's the ability to transition really that you end up finding the most value.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate for everybody listening too. Is like you want to be able to shift yourself around as you need to. Yeah, it's always like a moving target as to where you need to be. So, I mean, I think that makes sense for someone who wants to perform cognitively well. You don't want to be, super completely relaxed where you're like sleepy. And you also don't want to be sympathetic where you're impulsive and can't really think deeply either. It's like that nice sweet spot that you're talking about.
For sure. And I mean, those are generally, I think when you talk about, well, somebody comes and they're like, oh, I want to get into this relaxed state more. That's usually because they're trying to solve some kind of problem. Like, oh, I have trouble transitioning from being awake to sleep. I have trouble making myself drowsy and then relaxed enough to fall asleep with ease. Now we're talking about solving a problem. But if somebody already falls asleep and stays asleep with ease, then really what they need to be able to do is access different sort of brain patterns as needed throughout the day, right?
Totally. So for people listening, I'm going to kind of go through some of these couple different examples and maybe get a little deeper on them. One of the ones that you already mentioned, which I'm sure you get questions about this all the time, so I apologize in advance.
All good.
But it's related to like superventilation. People might have heard of like Wim Hof, like that type of breathing where just think about you're sustaining like a mild hyperventilation for a period of time, and that's going to help shift your state. So for the average CrossFit athlete, is that something that you would recommend doing as a long-term practice?
Man. Well, here, how about this? First, any practice is better than no practice. So if the choice is do nothing or do superventilation, then I choose superventilation because at least you can start to have some kind of feedback loop with how your breathing affects the way you feel. And then you can start learning and making adjustments. So yeah, I think it's fine if you find yourself attracted to that method and it's kind of easy to fit into your life. It's kind of like, should somebody squat or, does everybody need to squat? And there's some debate about it. It's like, well, I don't know, man. I'd rather have people squat imperfectly than not squat at all.
Right.
Because at least you can go, well, we have some standard of how your body should move through space. And then now we can generate a conversation. You can start generating a conversation, not just with your coach, but like with your own body and go, hey, what the heck is going on? Like, how come I can't squat down? How come that guy over there who's a similar age and height and all that, how come that dude can squat down, but I can't squat down? Now at least we're thinking about it, right? Which is better than just remaining ignorant.
Right. maybe you compare it to like, Wim Hof might be like the equivalent of CrossFit if you're talking about exercise, where it's like, yeah, if you only do like Metcons every day, you're going to learn a lot about your body and you're probably going to get in decent shape. You're probably going to have some other stuff that you might be able to shift and maybe do differently that might help you out over the long term, but that's better than nothing for sure.
Sure. And I think, if I'm totally frank, I think better than nothing is exactly what it sounds like. It doesn't mean it, you know what I mean? It's better than nothing, but it doesn't mean it's sufficient. Does that make sense? So
yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things that we've found is that, and why we broke from any methodology, is because you have the sort of general response to whether it's exercise prescription, but then there's the individual response, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, if we use CrossFit as an example, you have CrossFit's sort of general methodology, functional movement. So, high intensity movement, so large load over long distances, right? And that is a fantastic inroad, but we all know that once you start, especially if you're a coach or if you just look around in your own gym, there's a lot of individuation going on. There's like what's prescribed, like, 225 deadlift today, right? And you've got like 10% or less of the population in your facility who can do that with proficiency. And then everybody else is like, Tom over there has a bad back, so he's doing rack pulls. And, Susie is new, so her deadlift is actually 75 pounds. And this person over there is doing a little bit less reps. And this person, but there's you have to have some general prescription to begin with, or you can't even have a conversation. Where we started to come in and look at things was, if individuation is a better expression, how do we assess people? And so rather than you think about any protocol, how can we assess people in a way that's simple and direct, and then based on those assessments, give some intelligent recommendations? One downside of any superventilation, whether it's a Wim Hof or it comes from yoga, is that we've seen it, people who have anxiety or people who, it's initiated panic attacks, and
yeah, seriously,
it can generate issues for people who have blood pressure problems or who have cardiovascular issue. So it does have some danger associated with prolonged superventilation like that you have to be aware of. But again, I think for most of the general population, especially if you don't have a pre-existing condition, it's good to think about it. And a lot of people get started there, and then at some point they go, well, what else do I do? And then they learn more, which is great. And you see that with CrossFit too. People do CrossFit and then they go, man, Olympic lifting sure is cool. Let me learn more about how this, like, what is this expression of this sport, and why are these movements like this? And you can have a cool conversation with somebody about becoming more proficient at that aspect.
Yeah, I think people probably get into superventilation initially just because it's so intense that it reveals what your breath can actually do for you.
Yeah, they feel something, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They feel something.
It like changes.
That's the same reason people, like, if they haven't felt anything, they've been working out and it's boring, and they've been walking on a treadmill and they're by themselves and they haven't made any friends. And then you go to a CrossFit gym and you go, oh man, this is hard work. I feel something when I do this. And that person over there is working hard and they're encouraging me to work hard, and there's some sense of measurement, right? Okay, I'm into this. And I think that's the main thing is feeling something, is that people are drawn to something where they can feel some kind of change. And when you're talking about more parasympathetic driven, slow breathing practice, the feeling of change is prolonged, right? You have to wait for it. And that's why it's good to have a measurement tool. So for us, we use a CO2 tolerance test that was derived from an old freediving test. And then we gave people, now we have some scoring system, and people go, oh, okay, I see there's a number associated with my proficiency, which for us was a more effective effective road to take, and takes into consideration a little bit more of the whole picture regarding physiology. Because one thing I've certainly learned is that you cannot balk at the vast sort of tendrils that breath has inside of human physiology. It's pretty incredible. And the more layers you peel back, the more things you realize it affects and how many things it's affected by. And you go, ooh, oh man, I better not do this haphazardly. I better pay attention to what's going on. So
well, really quickly, let's go back. Can you explain what that test is? Just like the quick version.
Yeah, sure. So the CO2 tolerance test, or sometimes we call it the exhale test, is essentially just a timed nasal exhale through, so the whole test is 4 breaths long. You take 3 quote unquote normal breaths in and out through the nose. You take a 4th big full breath. You hit start on a stopwatch, and then you exhale through your nose as long and continuously as possible. And any interruptions in a continuous exhale, you hit stop. And then that time, so whatever, if you exhaled continuously for 30 seconds, then that's your score. We have a breath calculator you plug the number into, and then it makes a recommendation on where to start your breath practice. So
where can people get the calculator?
You can go to shiftadapt.com/breathing. Cool. And take the test for free, and it'll say, hey, here's where you can start. And pretty simple business. So and we've started using that in some studies as well. There's a couple studies we've been involved in where we're starting to look at the efficacy of that test compared to some other breathing and stress tests. So all anecdotal right now.
Yeah. So, well, I'm curious about your thoughts on static apnea. So let's go there for a little bit. Sure. So just like holding your breath for people who don't know, just because I did this a little bit, and like I was training for it for probably about a month, and got super fried from doing it because I was trying to do like on a daily basis. But what might be an acceptable score for something like that? Just like holding your breath for, an average fit person.
I mean, I think a minute is a good first step. And then anything over 3.5 minutes, you're specializing. Is a good rule of thumb that I found. Now, I've definitely gone through periods where I just wanted to explore the practice as deeply as I could, and I've gone into some really long breath holds. But as far as what kind of scalability did that provide me outside of being able to hold my breath, I would say 0.
Yeah.
It just didn't matter for the other things that I'm interested in improving. So that's a question you always have to ask yourself. Is it's okay to do a deep dive, but at some point you have to go, okay, well, what's the outcome I'm really after? And does this transfer to anything else that I care about? If the answer is no, then it's time to move on to something else. So, when it comes to static apnea, we know, for example, if you're doing repetitive, like true hypoxic work. So, just to clarify for your listeners, when you're doing breath holding, there's a state called hypercapnia, which is just elevated carbon dioxide, and it always precedes hypoxia. So carbon dioxide levels build up because carbon dioxide is a byproduct of aerobic metabolism. Your oxygen starts to get used. That's the oxygen that's in the system gets used. There's no new oxygen coming in. And then at a certain point, depending on your proficiency, you start to get below 90% in your blood oxygen levels. And that's when we're talking about true hypoxia. There's some pretty good research to show that regular intervals of true hypoxia will cause additional red blood cells to be produced in the body. That is wonderful. And people hear that and go, woohoo! The downside is as soon as you stop, it goes backwards. So in about 2 weeks, you lose it because it costs energy. And that's the thing to know, is that no matter what training outcome you're trying to get, whether it's from breath practice or you're deadlifting or whatever, every choice that you make has an energetic cost for your body. There's some kind of, and I mean this in a literal, like, chemical way. There's a a metabolic cost from maintaining that capacity. And if it's not being used, then there's no reason for it to remain. So your body starts to disassemble those components right away, because it's like, why are we going to spend? It's kind of like if you're spending money on a business that isn't producing anything. You're like, well, why are we spending money on that? It's not doing anything for us. Take it down. Put the money somewhere else. That's how your body works. So I think those static apneas, now that's the physiological side. What static apnea can do is help you realize what the physiological feeling of fear really is, if you're willing to challenge yourself. And that's like some of the most legitimate fear, panic feelings that I've ever had to deal with, as far as like learning how to connect, because there's not a lot going in the environment when you're just sitting still, right? You don't have outward actions to project your emotions onto. So all you can feel is what's going on in my body and what's the emotion associated with it. And you start to make that connection. And so just for that value alone, exploring apnea style training is really, really valuable, because you go, oh man, that panic feeling, it starts as like the little seed of anxiety, just like you get whatever, if you're not comfortable public speaking, and you realize like, oh, this feeling of anxiety that I get, whether it's a legitimate anxiety problem or just the sensation of anxiety, that's a physiological thing that exists in my body. It's not just like a cloud of feeling over here. It's like it has a physical component. And if something has a physical component, that means you can use a physical behavior to alter it. And it's connected right to your breath pattern. And so that's a tremendous lesson to take away from apnea work, other than, will it make my endurance better? That's like for me, that's like the low end of the totem pole when it comes to what are the benefits.
Yeah, I would totally agree. So when I was doing it, it was super exhausting. Like, yeah, it improved, but I was like, this isn't going to be transferring to me getting better at, my sport. It was more so just like, I'm getting better at this thing. However, certainly, like you said, I think what I probably will carry with me is like just staying a little bit more calm when you feel like you're suffocating.
Yep.
Which is, it's applicable to workouts for sure if you're trying to
Absolutely.
test. Yeah. So I think that's honestly probably one of the biggest benefits that people can get, is just, being okay with just sitting there and being super uncomfortable. And while you're super uncomfortable, challenging yourself to use the least amount of energy possible and to just stay completely calm and relaxed.
Yeah.
Which is not a typical response.
No. And to start becoming aware of the conversation that you're having with yourself in those moments. And this is something when people come to the Art of Breath seminar, this is the coach who does all the programming for Shift and is one of the lead instructors for the Art of Breath, Danny Yeager. He runs a CrossFit gym in Minneapolis. And he's always, one of the things he always challenges the athletes to do is like, okay, yeah, this breathing stuff is super important, but what's the conversation you're having with yourself while you're doing this? And if you can use breathing as a transition point for what this sounds like. So there's this evolution that we do at the end of the day in the Art of Breath, and it's hugely CrossFit inspired. I still remember the first time Brian McKenzie and I did this workout. It's 3 intervals on a fan bike. We did an assault bike at the time because there wasn't an Echo bike yet, right? So that death machine. So it's 3 intervals on an assault bike. You do 30 seconds all out max effort you can do calories and wattage, whatever floats your boat. Then you get 90 seconds rest. And you do that 2 times, and then you do the third 30-second sprint. And then the last interval, you wait for your heart rate to get below 100 beats a minute. You just let your body eat the suck factor. And it's terrible. If you ever done a 30-second, like a true all out on an assault bike, it feels like you're getting punched in the face essentially for 25 seconds, right? The first 5, you're like, yeah, I'm a stud. And then the next 25 seconds, you're like, oh my God, I'm going to die. So we have people do that. And then we give them a little bit of brief. Hey, what was that like? Da, 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 da. Okay, now we're going to use a breath technique. And in between each interval, you're going to use this breath technique, and we're going to see both how it affects. We're going to see what happens, right? And you're going to record your wattage every time. Cool. So we have people do it, and then we see some variance in wattage. Some people go down and then come back up. Some people climb higher than they did on their very first interval. Some pretty cool stuff that actually happens physiologically. But one of the most interesting things is we ask people, what was going on in your mind? Like, what were you thinking about second evolution, first evolution? And like, oh man, the first evolution, I was just thinking like, this sucks. I don't want to do this. Why are we doing this at this seminar? This is dumb. I don't work out like this. The second one, they were thinking, okay, I'm going to do, inhale, exhale, breathe on purpose, thinking about what am I supposed to be doing? You got this. Like the internal conversations would take a hard right, and some would become really positive, but most would at least become neutral. They were so focused on what's the actual breath pattern that sometimes that was enough. People felt like they had enough agency over how they felt that it just didn't go totally negative. Right. Yeah. And you could see changes in like, well, when somebody feels different and their self-talk's different, their posture stays better on the bike, which means their power output's better. So it's cool. You see this cascade of improvements essentially just by modifying this one component, but that one component is a central hub to how we feel and perform. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really neat. It's just getting someone to focus on something other than, the pain of whatever they're doing is, huge benefit. So how much, this is something that I've personally been kind of going back and forth on. Obviously, like you have to get people to experiment with the breath to be able to figure out and to probably pull back on some of the dysfunctional breathing that they have. But to a certain extent, if you're trying to manipulate your breathing too, I find that oftentimes people do that in a way that it doesn't result in a good outcome. If they're just talking about like testing a workout where they're trying to get truly just their best test, not necessarily experimenting or, having some particular outcome that they want besides just like the best score possible. At what point is like changing or manipulating your breath just inhibiting the natural way of you doing it maybe correctly?
It depends on how skilled you are at using the breath. So that's one thing that's really important to understand is that there's some low skill entry points when it comes to using the breath, especially if we're talking about in a performance related event. But anytime you introduce a new variable into any athlete's arsenal, it's going to be an inhibitor until they're proficient. Right. Because it's not organized in their nervous system yet. So, and that's with anything. So it's like, so if you take somebody and let's say you have an intermediate male athlete and they can snatch 200 pounds, but they've been stuck at 200 pounds for 6 months. They just can't get past it. And you go, okay, we're going to retool the way that you snatch. We're going to shift your weight. You're going to drop your hips. Probably the first handful of times it's going to feel worse because it's different. So to the human body, different is always bad at first, unless you're talking about the removal of pain, right? So different is generally your body goes, wait, this is not how we do stuff. So it costs more energy in the short term. The long term though, then on the upswing, you see, oh, well, now that I made these adjustments and I continued to make them in a way that they got integrated, I actually have better leverage on the barbell. So now I can snatch 2.25, but it might take 9 months. Does that make sense? And
yeah, absolutely.
So similarly with breath, if it's somebody who's in a competition cycle, then I go, no, we're not going to put it in competition yet. We can do it before competition to help you get focused. We can use it as a recovery aid. We can do it to help you get to sleep. Then when they cycle the off season, then we can go, okay, we're going to introduce this into your repertoire. With all that said, if you're an amateur, have fun, CrossFit, or do whatever for health, then that's a context you should always remember. Like if it makes your workout of the day go down for a couple months, the truth is it doesn't matter. It just doesn't. It doesn't matter to anybody. You're not going to lose a sponsorship, or it's not how you feed your kids. But if you're Rich Froning and your performance starts to degrade drastically, it could cost you money. So you got to be careful about what you take on and what you don't. But if you're like, me, and you just exercising to, look good in a t-shirt and live longer, then then be honest with yourself and go, hey, I'm going to try this because it's going to make me feel better and do better, and all of that. So you just have to be honest about what's the context. But with all that said, you can intelligently add that stuff in, and sometimes it's also a matter of getting proper guidance, like getting with somebody who knows what to put in and when, and how to progress you intelligently into using these things properly.
Yeah. I think a good example of that might be nasal breathing, where it's going to slow you down. It will slow you down for like a
100%.
while, like a long time, actually.
Yep.
But if you do that, long enough, and you do that maybe outside a competitive setting, if you're someone who really cares about your performance in that sense, then you will see long-term improvements from that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of it just requires the ego to get checked, but with nasal breathing, I know it was a slap in the face for me. I considered myself pretty fit. And I was using, before I started doing a lot of nasal training, I was using a training mask, because Brian and I were like using the training mask all the time. And then it got to where I was like inverting the seal at the highest setting. Like I was just flipping the seal. And I was like,
it just sucks to your face.
Yeah, it just sucks to your face. I was like, okay, well, this thing, I don't have any more use for this, because it's a resistance device, right? So if it's not providing resistance anymore, what is it for? I remember getting rid of it and then starting to work hard with my mouth shut. And I was like, oh God, this is I felt like the lowest level of that was like 2 steps above the hardest thing I'd ever done with a resistance breathing device. And man, it sucked so bad to work hard with my mouth shut. But then I was like, okay, well, what am I doing? I'm trying to learn something here, and something that's this challenging. There's got to be something to learn from this. There's got to be something to glean from this experience, and it's been tremendously helpful. Not just in performance, like my conditioning is and stays at a baseline that I'm very happy with because of it. But also, I've had cool side benefits, like my allergies mostly went away, and I was like, oh well, that's a nice surprise. I don't have horrible sinuses every spring and fall. And it turns out, your nose is the part of your face that's designed to deal with air, and it's the protection system for your lungs. And so it's like, all right, well, this makes sense. Like the physiology is there. And one of the things we always tell people is that you can walk on your hands, right? But it's not as effective as walking on your feet, because that's how nature helped you evolve, right? And it's the same thing with your mouth and your nose. Like you can breathe through your mouth rather, but your nose has evolved to deal with air, and so you should choose your nose as much as possible. But with that said, there's definitely a place for skillfully using mouth breathing.
Yeah. Which, now I'm really curious, when would be scenarios where mouth breathing is maybe the best tool for the job?
Very high intensity, beyond 85%. And what beyond 85% or 90% means for most people is usually not what they think. They think as soon as I feel like I'm working hard is 85%, and it's not. If you want a legitimate, like when we do a legitimate measurable outcomes, we do wattage tests. So we'll put you on a bike and have you work hard until failure. We'll exhaust you and then go. And this is how exercise testing is done anyway, right? They take you to exhaustion and then go, here's your true 100%. 80% of that is much higher than you're actually comfortable with maintaining, right? And
Yeah,
so then it's like you
absolutely.
realize like, oh, the majority of my training just by default is actually somewhere closer to 60 to 70% of my true 100%. And most of those times you should have your mouth shut, right? You should have your mouth shut. But, so for me, my primary sport is Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. And there are some times where you're in the midst of some high intensity exchanges with people, and a lot is happening, and you're dealing with a bunch of variables. I'm not worried about if my mouth is open or not. It's when the dust settles, then I go, okay, let me get control of this thing again and chill. So it might be the same thing as like if you're doing a CrossFit workout and depending on your efficiency and different movements, but we'll make some assumptions. If you're doing a 20 calorie row, you're probably going to breathe out of your mouth a bit because it's just straight power. Like I'm going to grind through this because if it's like intervals, I'm going to do 20 calorie rows with 2 minutes in between. You're going to get after it. But what you want to be able to do is in the 2 minutes rest, transition back to a more aerobic state as quickly as possible so that you can perform better on the next one. And so that's a sliding scale. And that's why we say it in percentages and based on proficiency, because some people are really good rowers and are very proficient and skilled. And some people it's really a weak spot for them. And so it really depends. But what we'd like to say is, if you're working really hard, in that kind of 85, 90+% range of work, then you should probably, you're going to open your mouth. Now, the difference is it's not just open your mouth willy nilly. We've systematized this into what we call a gear system. And that's an easy way to think about it is like they're gears. So it's not like when you're driving a car, you go, oh, fourth gear is bad. You just want fourth gear to be used appropriately in order to maintain RPMs in the vehicle. And, the way we always explain it is a Ferrari F50 and a Volkswagen Bug both have first gear, right? But a Volkswagen Bug goes 16 miles an hour in first gear, and a Ferrari F50 goes 60 miles an hour in first gear. But they both have a first gear, and so that's how you have to think about it, is like a Volkswagen Bug shouldn't compare itself to a Ferrari. It should just know like what's the capacity of my own engine, and then based on that total capacity, decide when I use each variable, right? And for us, we think of that as like first gear is like slow nasal breathing, and we have second and third gear, which are variations, not important for the purposes that we're talking about today. And then there's fourth gear, which is in through the nose, out through the mouth, and that's usually high work rate. And then breathing only through the mouth, like that's usually like near exhaustion. I'm getting close to 100%, right? I'm getting close to fail.
I think the gearing system that you guys talk about is extremely helpful for people to be able to, yeah, just begin to be able to develop a relationship with breathing at different work rates. It's super helpful. I think people like to think about nasal breathing, as like sort of a silver bullet right now.
Yeah.
And that's probably the case because most people, just like the vast majority of people, need to work on it because they're just not at a proficient level at all.
Well, we know that hyperventilation and overbreathing are a huge problem. They're mostly associated with, metabolic disorders, true hyperventilation, which is that your breath rate and your carbon dioxide and oxygen exchange that are happening in the body don't actually properly match the metabolic requirements in order for you to do normal working things for your body, right? That's what diabetes is, right? It's a metabolic disorder. But when you talk about athletes, what we're really talking about is an expression of inefficiency. And I, for one, would love to see more athletes keep their mouths shut, especially when they're at less than 60% effort. But if you say only nasal breathing should be done, then I would say you've never worked that hard, right? Because if you put your feet to the fire in whatever way, that can mean a really intense CrossFit workout. Like if you really do the most famous CrossFit workout, which is Fran, and you put your ass into it and you go and you really test yourself, there's no way for 99% of us you're going to keep your mouth closed because it's going to be too close to our potential work rate. Now, there's going to be some outliers like CrossFit Games athletes whose total range, their total potential for work is so far beyond what that workout can test anymore that they can do it nasal only and still go very fast because their total work potential is so much higher. But for average folks like, me and you and most people who just CrossFit for health and fitness and fun, Fran is a fantastic test of intensity. And it's not likely you're going to, if you're really using it as a test of intensity, you're probably not going to keep your mouth closed. But that said, there's other workouts where you could do really great. Like, for example, Murph. If you can learn to pace yourself with nasal work while you're doing Murph, or especially this time of year, it's almost March. The real diehards start doing Murph prep in like the next 2 weeks, right? They start running and they're doing little Cindy variations all the time. I remember from being in the gym, guys are like, oh, it's March. Murph's come in. They start talking about what their training plan is going to be, which is great. I think it's cool that people, they have a goal, they have an aim. There's way worse things to spend your time thinking about and doing than, hey, how we're going to, as a community, attack our fitness test, right? It's good on them. Happy to see it. Actually, a good friend of mine, Dr. Brian Hickey, he has a really fantastic, if anybody wants to see a breakdown of Murph from the viewpoint of an exercise scientist, if you go to YouTube and you look up Dr. Brian Hickey and just put Murph, he does a breakdown of how to approach Murph from an exercise science standpoint. And it's fantastic. Like, hey, in this aerobic part, in the runs, you should be thinking about this. You can nasal breathe. Here, you can start opening your mouth. This is more lactic driven. It's really cool. If you're like a CrossFit nerd, you bug on it. It's pretty fun. But yeah, I mean, I think that the conversation about nasal breathing is important and it has to be had because so much dysfunction comes out of not doing it. But if you're talking about athletes, and you're working with a 100-meter sprinter and you ask them to keep their mouth closed while they're doing their event, no bueno. It's not going to happen. It's the demands of the environment are just too high. But that said, there's other things they can do with their mouths closed that will center them and improve their performance and dial them in. So it still has valid. And that's really up to the coach, is to understand the tool and then to use the tool appropriately. Right.
Right. Like get them into the right state, like arousal level before they actually go into the event, even if their event itself, is going to be mouth breathing, for example.
Absolutely. And you can use it as a conditioning tool. So at a seminar I did last year, one of Usain Bolt's coaches was there and they were talking about, they came up to me because I have a slide with him on it. And they were like, hey, he tapes his mouth all off season. He's doing his sprints. And then as he starts to do higher intensity, they let him open his mouth up. But when he's trying to build his conditioning so that he can do more reps on the track, mouth closed. It's harder, it acts like a governor, but it builds up a lot of resilience. And sometimes it's good for it to act like a governor. So it's a very clever coaching tool you can use when you want to slow yourself, or if you're a coach and athlete down, if you just want them to, like if you have somebody who's stubborn and doesn't know how to drop it to 60%, and you're like, man, I really actually need a 60% work rate from this person today or from myself, you can just self-impose, I'm keeping my mouth closed, and it'll force you to go slower. And then as a result, like, I'll do less damage to my soft tissues. I won't get as sore and won't beat my joints up today. So it's a great way to self-govern, or it's a wonderful tool if you're a coach, for sure.
Right. I think even for a lot of people that tend to come out hot in long workouts, that might be a super good way to do it. So like you mentioned, I forget his name, but he was the exercise scientist, was basically saying that you should maybe treat the first mile of Murph nasal.
Yeah.
And then during maybe the gymnastics pieces, you start to open up with the cycle rates really high and some stuff like that. Whereas like if you're someone who most of the workouts you do are 15, 20 minutes tops and you have a marathon row, you probably shouldn't be mouth breathing the first, well, for them, probably 3 hours, but certainly not the first hour, for example.
Well, and here's the thing is like, you certainly can, but at what cost?
Yeah.
That's always the real question. And we know it's a physiological reality that once you start opening your mouth and you start dumping higher levels of carbon dioxide, that what starts to happen is your body makes the shift to higher levels of lactate usage sooner. Now, there's always a little bit of some, a little bit of the other. It's not as definitive as like I'm aerobic and then I'm anaerobic. That's not really how your energy systems work. But what will happen is the percentages will start to shift to the right earlier. And the reason that happens is your body needs the presence of carbon dioxide in order to release oxygen. They go together. And so if you're soon, then you let off more carbon dioxide, which means you're going to, as a result, be less efficient at releasing oxygen. Now, if you're doing a marathon, let's say you're doing, even if it's not a marathon, you're doing a 5K and you're racing and the person next to you and you're neck and neck. And for the first 4K, you've kept it nasal and you're still neck and neck. Then the last 500, I've got a reserve now, right? And then you burn it. Boom, I'm getting this done. Unless, of course, you got something to do right after that. But if it's just like a 5K, just as an example, then you got extra fuel to burn off. And if they've been over there for, most of it, then you go, okay, I got you. Like I have another, I'm a Ferrari. I got another gear in my motor and you're all out of options. And that can happen if you're trying to race yourself too. If you're just trying to beat your own time, you can beat yourself. You can beat your time with strategy.
Yeah, I think another strategy could just be like you want to maybe negative split, like maybe more of the workouts where you can sustain a slower respiration rate and start out maybe just a slightly lower power output. And that way you can kind of feel out a workout and increase as you need to from there, rather than being right up against your ceiling and redlining the entire time.
Yeah, well, then you have to ask yourself, what am I getting out of that? I've seen that plenty as a coach. And it's like, I feel like, and it's not right, wrong, or otherwise, just I feel like sometimes people use the intensity as just, it's a way to forget their day. They just want to forget about the other shit that they deal with. And they just want to come in and just like, I'm going to burn it down. And it's like, well, you're just giving away one poison in exchange for another, right? It's like, no, I don't want that hemlock, but I'll take the cyanide, and it's like, man, what's the point? So the way I always not just approached it myself, but taught it as a coach was that if this isn't how you make a living, then it's a practice, right? But if you're a professional athlete, we might have a different conversation. It's like, hey man, you want your contract renewed? And there's some nuances to that too, but it's like, hey, you want your contract renewed? You want to win? What's important to you? But if you're a nurse who has to work the graveyard shift, is burning it down really that smart? Like you want some reserve so that what you're doing is actually supporting your performance where it matters, which is with your family, at your job, right? And not just crushing yourself and then walking around super sore and beat up and your back hurts and all that. Now, there's a flip side to that coin that has become prominent as well, which is nobody wants to work hard. It's like there was like a swing and now the pendulum swinging back the other way. It was like before CrossFit became prominent, people really didn't know how to work really hard. And I think that's one thing that CrossFit introduced to the general public of like what it's like to work really hard and know what does exhaustion truly feel like, which can be a valuable thing. Then people got so addicted to metabolic conditioning and like the named workout, the test style, they treat every workout like it's a test, that the pendulum swung back in the other direction. And now it's like, never go there. Some people are like, oh, never do that. And it's like, well, if you don't know if something works when you're on fire, you really don't know if it works. So it's like you have to have something where you test. Can I keep it together mentally? Can I execute a game plan I've created for myself? What's my failure point? If you don't know that stuff, then when you're out in the world, it's not useful either. That's why, again, like, not to harp on jujitsu, but like that's one of the things that makes Brazilian jiu-jitsu, for example, so unique and so uniquely effective, is that it's not enough to practice in class and do drills. You have to roll. It's a part of the ranking process. You have to spar. Why? Not because they want you to be like, oh, I'm tough. They want to know when you're under stress and you're tired and somebody else has a say, can you still do the stuff that we taught you today? And if you can't, it's okay. It just means it's a learning opportunity. So you go test it, and then it shows holes in your understanding. And so you have to have both. It's like you shouldn't just always test. You also see in jiu-jitsu guys who only roll and never practice techniques suck unless they're advanced, right? Unless they're like advanced color belts. But you see the guys who are like white belts, and then like 6 months into being a white belt, they don't come to class. They just come to open mat. They just stay sucky. But you see guys who don't roll that much, they stay sucky too, right? So you have to have both. You have to have a technical development aspect where you're being thoughtful, and you have to test yourself in the fire a little bit too. You got to be in the frying pan sometimes, or in either case, in either extreme, you're in trouble, right?
Yeah, in first responders, wrestling, grappling, MMA, like all that stuff where you have to be reactive. I mean, even field sports, you still have to make decisions on things, even more so than, an online qualifier where you're not even next to anybody else when you're actually doing the workout. It's a different beast for sure, and you have to be able to make a lot more decisions in those environments.
Yeah, and I mean, what if even if you're not, it's the surprise that gets us, right? So people, if you're a first responder, if you're an ER nurse, you're used to decisions like, oh man, here it is. This is my signal. Something's happening. I'm gonna let my training take over. But what if you're in your kitchen cooking dinner? You're a dad. You're at home. You're cooking dinner, and you hear one of your kids who's out in the front, like you hear like a loud bang, and you hear somebody cry. You got to be able to put down what you're doing and move into action, figure out what's going on, and make decisions. That's a part of being alive. And so, can you stay calm when you need to be? And if you haven't ever practiced formulating and executing a game plan when everything isn't perfect, you're in trouble. And one of the great things about breath is in those moments of it can drive a wedge between the environment and panic and freezing, and it helps you alter the sort of trajectory with a physiological behavior, and it's one that everybody has access to. And you see people who are high performers in that way, they go anyway, they'll sigh, or you see people who are really good at the starting line of an event shaking their arms out and going right? They do it naturally. So learning how to insert breath protocols in there is just systematizing something that people who perform well naturally do anyway, right? So it's a valuable all around skill for sure.
Yeah, super interesting. Like kind of reverse engineering what the high performers do.
It's what we always do, right? You look at like a snatch technique, right? And so it's like environment. What does the environment dictate? And then who of us already figured out how to manipulate themselves or the environment or a tool the best? That's why, like when you look at modern Olympic weightlifting, the modern snatch,
so much different,
right, took the place of the split snatch because the barbell was different, right? So if you don't have a barbell that spins, trying to do a squat snatch it's very, very difficult with any real weight that is close to your maximum. It's very tough. And if you've ever snatched with like a Rogue beater bar and then snatch with like a premium Eleiko bar, you go, oh wow, that matters so much. You're like, bah, it's like you feel like 5% better. It's kind of like if you play guitar and you play with like, a shitty guitar and then you pick up a Taylor, you like feel like you got better because the action's better and it tunes more perfectly. So it's like somebody figured out the environment and then you reverse engineer. So I don't remember off the top of my head because my weightlifting history is not so great anymore, but we look at who figured it out first, right? How to snatch into a squat position. And then somebody was like, damn, that looks effective. And then they tried it and they tried it. And then now there's all these little variants. But, like my grandfather, who's was a Korean War veteran, he was doing split cleans like in the 40s when he was in high school. And he was like, "Oh yeah, we used to do cleans." And I was like, "Oh yeah, Grandpa, I know about cleans. Yeah, you jump it up and then you catch it in a squat." And he was like, "Oh, I don't know about that. We used to just jump it up into a lunge." And I was like, "You did?" And he was like, "Oh yeah." He was like, "Yeah, the bars were real stiff, so that was just the best way to do it." Like he didn't really think about it, and then that was just the context he knew it in. And I was like, "Oh yeah, bars really weren't. They didn't have these like amazing like 28 needle bearing systems in them that allowed them to spin so perfectly. It was just a stiff steel rod. So the best way to catch it with stability was in a split stance." Damn, those guys were strong back then too, though, man. Good God, some of the weight they were moving like that. It's just, in wooden shoes, I mean, they're still using wood now, but it was like so much more arcane then. It was pretty cool. But in any case, I think my point's made. It's like we look at the environment, who navigates the environment well, and then we take a piece of what they figured out, and then you systematize it so that more people can use it. And that evolution happens over and over again. And it's probably why humans are here at all.
Yeah. Super interesting stuff for sure. I'm going to give you one last question here.
Sure.
So if you were to suggest an entry-level protocol or breathing technique for somebody listening that they just kind of get their feet wet, start today and just start doing something, what would it be?
Well, I would say, first of all, you need, like if you're going to do one that's like a quiet time thing, I would say like an extended exhale. So if you want to reach a relaxation state, which is usually the goal for most people when they start a breath practice, is to do a progressively prolonged exhale. So if you're in a position where you're like, I want to feel more relaxed, whether it's before bed or you're stressed, you inhale through your nose for 2 or 3 seconds, then you exhale longer than you inhaled. And then you inhale and then you exhale a little longer. And then you keep doing that. And you don't want the exhale to feel stressful. So if it starts to feel stressful, then you just go back to where you started. So you think about it like a ladder, like you climb up the ladder until the heights get a little scary. And then you go, that's too high. And then you go back down and you climb back up, and you do that 3 or 4 times and you go, wow, man, I feel better. And so that's a well-known technique for engaging parasympathetic or the relaxation response is an exhale that's longer than the inhale. The other thing I would recommend, which is sort of like part B, so it's like 1A and then 1B, is to start using it when you're moving your body. And that doesn't have to be like straight into intensity. That's not what I would recommend. I would say like whether you go for a walk or a jog or a bike ride or a stationary bike, whatever, just start doing it with your mouth closed. Just start getting the feeling of breathing nasally while you do a little bit of work. And don't make it super hard or super fancy. I would focus on being successful and it feeling challenging but good. So those are probably the 2 easiest places to start.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the parasympathetic extended exhales after training, before bed, 2 prime times to do that. And then warm-ups, cool downs, easy aerobic work, recovery days, great time to do the nasal stuff.
Absolutely.
Entry-level things.
100%.
Hey, Rob, thank you so much.
Ben, no problem. Thanks for having me, man.
Thanks for listening today. If you're someone who just started listening to the show, I would encourage you to subscribe so you can stay up to date. If you're someone who's been listening for a while, I would encourage you to rate and review the show. And lastly, the best thing that you can do to support our work is also the best thing that you can do for your performance. and that is by hiring one of our coaches. Until next time, stay the course.